call the March 9th Executive Committee meeting to order. First, I'll tell you that I am playing the role of Terry Sinat today because Terry is traveling in India.
Oh, nice.
He's having more fun than we are. First up, we've got meeting minutes from February 9th. They need a motion and a second. Motion from Supervisor Wells, second from Council President Cole. Please vote.
We approved the minute.
Yeah.
It's technology.
Defective actuator.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed unanimously. We got any speaker slips? Great. So we will move on. Any member comments before we move on? We'll move on to item 3, review of draft board agendas. Gloria, take it away.
So I'll be providing the agenda for March 23rd. First item we have is approval of the meeting minutes, followed by public comments, communication member comments, and item number 3, which is the actions from policy advisory committees. On the consent calendar, we have item number 4, which is the approval of proposed solicitations and contracts. At this time, we know of one contract for insurance broker services. Item number 5 is the FY17 Transnet Extension Ordinance Funding Eligibility Request. This is coming through from ITOC and TC, and we're seeking to get a extension for MTS. Item number 6 is on your agenda today. It's the 2018 legislative program. This is the amendment to add the modification for the offshore oil drilling. Item number 7 is the proposed amendments to the conflict of interest code. Staff reviewed and found some areas that could be updated, so we'll be bringing that for an approval. Item number 8 is 2018 Bike Month and Bike to Work Day. Item number 9 is the Criminal Justice Research Clearinghouse Annual Update. This is information, and we'll be providing an update on retail crime and arrest statistics. Items number 10 and 11 are your standard report and meetings attended on behalf of SANDAG, followed by the report summarizing delegated actions taken by the Executive Director. On the Chair's report, item number 12, this has been rescheduled from your February board meeting, and we will be receiving Luis Videgaray, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs from Mexico. Item number 13 is an update on the SANDAG Executive Director recruitment. Chair Sinat will not be here, so he's asked Mayor Salas to provide an update on the recruitment. Item number 14 under reports is the preliminary FY19 program budget. You'll be hearing this item today, and based on your recommendation, the board will be asked to approve the draft budget for distribution for member agencies. Item number 15 is the Transnet 2018 short-term bond issuance. The board will be asked to authorize the issuance of some fixed-rate bonds for Mid-Coast. Item number 16, this is the first Transnet 10-year review proposed look-ahead implementation plan. Based on input from the Transportation Committee, we are going to move this item to a future board date so that we can get more details and add some additional information to that report. Item number 17 is the San Diego Forward 2019-2050 Regional Plan Performance Measures. We'll be bringing the proposed performance measures for use in the RTP. This is coming up from your Transportation Committee and Regional Planning. Items number 18 and 19 are 2 budget amendments. The first one is for the proposed FY18 budget amendment for State Route 11 Otay Mesa East. And number 19 is for the Elvira to Moreno double track. We'll be adding some funds from the City of San Diego to fully fund the wet utility agreements. Item number 20 is a closed session related to the Los Penasquitos Bridge Replacements Project. And for the purposes of managing this meeting for time, since we have the foreign minister attending, we'd like to push this to a future meeting date as well. That concludes the March 23rd agenda. I'll move on to the April 13th agenda. For this meeting will be held at PALA. This is the San Diego Regional Tribal Summit. So as part of the consultation process to develop the Regional Transportation Plan, staff has worked with the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association to develop an agenda to seek input and foster collaborative opportunities to implement some of the strategies that come out of this into the next RTP. there any questions?
I got a quick question. I noticed there's an exec committee meeting that day as well. Is the exec meeting at 10 or is the exec meeting at 9 or is there one on that day?
On April 13th?
Yes.
April 13th, there is an executive committee meeting, and that would start at 9.
So we got, okay, so.
At Paula.
At
At
Paula.
Paula,
So we
yes.
have a 9 a.m. exec meeting there, okay, at Paula.
There's a
Okay.
separate room that's been set aside for the executive committee.
Further comments or questions? Absent that, I'm looking for a motion or a second.
So move, I like this Paula idea.
She's
Close to my ranch.
Motion by Supervisor Horn and a second by Wells. I've been told that the voting system went to India with Terry, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Reflect motion passes. Moving on to item 4, the draft fiscal year 2019 program budget. We have Andre and Sandy here to present the draft budget. Welcome. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. So at your last executive committee meeting that we held at the board retreat, Sandy and I presented the draft budget for the first time. And we highlighted the areas of emphasis, the strategic goals, and reviewed the current funding expectations and highlights of each of the main programs. So today's item will actually touch on those items again, but in addition, we will now give to you the details of the balanced budget, amounts for each of the programs, along with an update on our staffing resources, the contingency programs and funds, and performance on our newly created Section 115 trust. So the proposed budget totals $1.3 billion and utilizes a wide variety of funding sources and is prepared in accordance with the FTA and FHWA guidelines, which require submission of a draft to the funding agencies each March. SANDAG bylaws require the draft budget to be approved by April 1st of each year and the final to be approved by June 30th. There are 3 primary components of the program budget where SANDAG directly manages the projects. First, the overall work program, or OWP, which is in chapters 2 and 3, and provides an inventory of SANDAG's regional planning projects and programs with a total budget of $44 million. Secondly, the regional operations and services section is in chapter 4 and includes all operations related programs and services, such as the SR 125 toll road, the freeway service patrol, and ARGIS programs and services. The total operations budget is $67.4 million. The third major component is the capital program in Chapter 9, which includes the projects approved as part of the Transnet extension that are currently underway and other regionally significant capital investments. Projected capital expenditures for 2019 are $914.6 million out of the total capital program of $8.9 billion. I will now describe the projected funding environment and the sources of funds we'll be counting on to pay for these programs. The recurring sources of local revenue are the sales tax-based Transportation Development Act, or TVA, and Transnet, which are expected to grow by 3%. These 2 sources of sales tax combine to provide about half of the recurring transportation revenue that fund the annual OWP projects, along with the Transnet bond proceeds. Over half of the funding to cover projected capital spending next year. Our strongest growth comes from local funds is to come from our toll operations that are expected to grow by 4% for SR 125 and 6.5% for I-15. Next, for state and federal funding, there are many state and federal programs that provide funding commitments for SANDAG activities. Revenues are projected to increase by 2% based on preliminary estimates received from state and federal government. Most of the remaining federal and state funds come from multi-year discretionary grant award on a competitive basis. Our member assessments for SANDAG and ARGIS member agencies are proposed to remain unchanged, while criminal justice member assessments increase annually on CPI, which is expected to be 2.62% for fiscal year 2019. So overall, our total recurring revenue for fiscal year 2019 is expected to increase by approximately 3.5% over prior year. Those Sandow contingency reserves are summarized in Chapter 12 for all the major programs, including the OWP, regional operations, capital budget, and the administration services. This year, we are proposing the use of $400,000 of the OWP contingency reserve to continue the implementation of AB 805, including monitoring for skilled and trained workforce, setting up the audit committee, and hiring a performance auditor. For operations, another benefit of the refinance of the SR 125 toll road last year, besides the dollar savings, was the amount of committed balances for the TIFIA loan was significantly reduced, thus increasing the uncommitted balance in the contingency reserve fund for operations. There are no significant changes proposed in the contingency reserves for the capital nor the administration budgets for fiscal year 2019. The highlights of the fiscal year 2019 activities are listed beginning on page 4 of this report or 17 of your tablets. Sandy will now touch on some of the proposed efforts.
Thank you, Andre. I will go through each of the 3 major programs and focus on new development and talk about notable activities making significant progress. Starting with the overall work program. When it comes to the OWP, our new efforts are primarily on the Plan of Excellence, which focuses on improving many of our processes through involving data for systematic evaluation, review, and performance audit procedures. Our ongoing efforts largely involve the update to your regional plan. The 2019 fiscal year will include the largest efforts in a 4-year update cycle as we conduct numerous outreach activities, draft the plan in a PIR, and circulate it for comment and response. We will also continue to implement the current 2015 plan through work in energy planning and grant programs for smart growth, active transportation, habitat management, and specialized transit for seniors. New in the program budget document this year is Appendix B, a table showing which projects in the OWP and operations are federal and state mandated versus locally funded through Transnet or dedicated grant funding. In operations, you may recall that when Sandow purchased the Southway Expressway in 2011, we identified a number of deficiencies, including the antiquated back office system and the aging roadway toll collection equipment, both of which needed to be replaced. In fiscal year 2019, we expect to complete the implementation of the regional tolling back office system, which will centralize the transaction processing and account management functions for the Southway Expressway and I-15 express lanes. It will enable us to provide these services for future toll facilities, such as State Route 11 or 10 Mesa East Port of Entry. We will also complete the implementation of the new roadway toll collection equipment for SR 125 and I-15 express lanes. In the capital program, we are experiencing our biggest year of spending. The Mid-Coast Corridor projects, including the Mid-Coast Trolley Line, San Diego River Bridge, Elvira to Marina Double Track, Gilman Drive Bridge, Boyd Drive improvements, and Rose Creek Bike Trail are all under construction. The Mid-Coast Trolley Line project alone is currently spending over $1 million per day, with fiscal years 19 and 20 expected to be even higher. On the North Coast Corridor, along with new HOV lanes, improvements along the I-5 and double tracking of the railroad, major lagoon restoration has begun and will continue for the next 5 to 7 years. All phases of the South Bay Rapid are under construction, with service beginning in fiscal year 19. The new route will include 11 stations along a 21-mile corridor from Otay Mesa border area to downtown San Diego. Around the county, the Transnet bike program is underway, with construction beginning on several new projects, including the Barrio Logan segment of the Bayshore Bikeway and segments of the North Park Mid-City Bikeways and Uptown Bikeways. Approximately 8 miles of bike facilities will open this coming year with the completion of the San Diego River Trail Stadium segment, Rose Creek in San Diego, East Street to Chesterfield and Encinitas, and additional segments of the Inland Rail Trail in the counties of San Diego and the cities of Vista and Oceanside. In attachment 2 are the changes in the capital project budgets relative to the approved current year budget. Examples of typical changes include adding a new phase like construction as funding and cost estimates become available. For example, on I-5 Boyd Drive improvement project, a budget increase of $23 million is proposed due to adding the construction phase of the project. In general, we have a few more years of intensive construction activities as we work with Caltrans and push hard to complete as much of the funded Transnet Early Action Program as possible. After that, things will taper off as future phases become dependent on securing new state and federal funding. In attachment 3 of your report, there's a comprehensive list of fiscal year 2018 expected accomplishments, helping to show the transition from the current year into next year. And now Andre will discuss the staffing and benefits section of the budget and next steps. The staffing.
Thanks, Sandy. So as part of the budget development process, excuse me, agency So as part of the budget development process, agency managers and executives have carefully considered the staffing resources required to successfully complete the projects in the draft program budget. Strategic consideration has been given to the use of regular, limited term, or tolling operations staff positions, as well as consultant services. The proposed new regular positions will directly support the plan of excellence. Several new operation positions are proposed to support the new tolling back office system, consolidating the I-15 and SR-125 customer support functions. And due to the continuous growth of SR-125, additional customer service and toll plaza attendant positions are proposed. The proposed new limited term positions are based on a number of new major agency initiatives, including the plan of excellence as previously described. A summary of proposed new positions and position reclassifications implemented for fiscal year 2019 is proposed in attachment 4, page 19 of the report, or 517 in the tablets. In preparation of the draft fiscal year 2019 budget, the agency has reviewed various components of its compensation and performance management programs. Current employee salaries have been reviewed, and our compensation consultant gathered market data regarding salary increases that other organizations are providing to employees. As a result of the data and analysis derived from this comprehensive review, a 2% increase is proposed in the physician salary range. Generally, this does not result in automatic increase in employee salaries. 3.5% pool is proposed for fiscal year 2019 that will be used to support the compensation program. The total cost would be approximately $1.3 million. Now, at this point, I'd like to point out that our Chair Sanat has expressed support of this budget along with these staffing recommendations. I think the letter is at your tables. Also, SANDAG established the Section 115 tax-exempt irrevocable trust in fiscal year 2017 as a means of saving for future pension costs. An initial contribution of $3.5 million was made to the trust. This amount represented the cost savings SANDAG realized due to pension reform changes. An additional $1 million contribution to the Section 115 trust was approved last fiscal year. As of December 2017, the annualized rate of return on the trust was approximately 6%. An additional $1 million contribution to the trust is recommended as part of the fiscal year 2019 annual program budget. So our next steps is today the Executive Committee is asked to, 1, authorize distribution of the draft fiscal year 2019 program budget to the funding agencies, and 2, recommend that the Board of Directors approve the draft fiscal year 2019 program budget and authorize distribution of the document to member agencies and other interested parties for review. At the March 23rd board meeting, there will be a more detailed presentation to the board on the highlights of the fiscal year 2019 program budget. At that meeting, I'll be joined by some of my fellow directors who will give presentations on how their departments helped to accomplish the goals set in this budget. On May 11th, the Executive Committee is scheduled to review the proposed final program budget, which will include comments received from the funding agencies, member agencies, and the public. Consistent with SANDAG bylaws, final board approval is scheduled for May 25th, 2018. That concludes our presentation. Sandy and I and the rest of staff are available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you both. As you just heard, you each have a copy of the letter that the chair wrote in support of the compensation, benefits, and staffing portion of the draft fiscal year 2019 budget. Terry and I met with Kim and staff to review each of the staff recommendations, and during that meeting we made a few requests. First, that we hold off on any changes that would convert limited term positions to regular status until an organizational review can be completed in fiscal year 2019. Second, that we move forward with proposed requests to add staff since they are either in support of the plan of excellence or reflect growing needs of the agency. Next, we believe a compensation adjustment pool of 3.5% is appropriate to continue the pay for performance model here at Sandig. And Terry and I also support adjusting salary ranges by 2% to keep up with the market. As Andre mentioned, this adjustment is not an automatic across the board increase, except for a handful of staff that fall below the new range minimums. Finally, we're recommending we continue the additional contribution towards pension liability of $1 million. The letter will also be distributed at the March 23rd board meeting when the item is presented. So with that, we have no public speakers. Comments and questions for Andre and Sandy?
Well, I just, more of a general, so you said that the employee compensation was $1 million, and it's annually, right?
The additional 3.5%?
Yes.
Correct.
It's 1 million. Okay. I heard there was a total of 1 million, but I just want to make sure there was an annual number. Okay. I have a question just on the overall draft of things. I mean, this is the biggest year for the spending of dollars out of, in many, many years, $914 million on the Mid-Coast, which is great. But I guess what I didn't find in this plan was that there wasn't any future, or any plans for any future projects as far as like EIRs and things like that to get projects ready for dollars to compete in the future. And in particular, the HOV lanes and connectors on the 78. We've got the PSR has been done, the planning stages have been done for that. It was paid for with local dollars. And then the board just approved $7 million for EIR for the connectors on the east end of the 78 at the 78-15 interchange. And I guess what I'm looking to do is seeing if we can find, if there's ways to find dollars for EIRs for projects that are coming forward, because the EIRs are going to be spread out for over 4 or 5 years. This one is estimated to be about $35 million over 4 or 5 years. So I think it'd be wise or prudent to be looking at funding some of these EIRs for projects that are in the plans, that so that when dollars do become available, we're shovel ready to go on those. And the HOV lanes and the connectors between the 15 and the 5 and the 78 would be primed for that. And it seems better, instead of, do the EIR all at once on that corridor instead of piecemealing it on this construction. I agree with maybe EIR now. So how can we, is there any way to do any mining for extra dollars in here, or how do we do that?
Jose Nuncio, Sandex staff. So, Mayor, to respond to your question, essentially the ability to bring projects forward and to start the next phase of work, which would be the environmental, really depends on how much money is anticipated to come to the region in the near term. So, right now, as the budget stands that Andre and Sandy presented, the funding supports essentially 2 very large corridors in addition to some smaller ones. The Mid-Coast, which is essentially funded with the FFTA, and then the I-5 corridor. With the current state and federal formula funds that the region gets, the I-5 corridor would be completed until about, extending the HOV lanes up to 78 would be completed until about 2024, 2025.
That's a construction.
That's the construction. At this point, SANAC has submitted over $1 billion for SB1 grants, and of that over $1 billion, about $360 million would support the I-5 project. If the region is successful in securing those funds, then the dollars, the state and federal formula dollars that would have gone to the I-5 project are now essentially freed up to begin work on other.
Not until 2024?
No, because it's the money that essentially is being assigned to the I-5 corridor beginning essentially right now through 2024.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not just talking about, I always like my project, and everybody else likes their projects, but it's I think we should be planning region-wide for future projects to pay for the EIRs, because for $30 million, I know it's a lot of money, but if it's spread out over several years, it's cheaper to possibly do that and start that process
right.
now.
So in terms of timing, so what we're waiting for right now is for the CTC to select the projects that will be successful as part of the SB1 grants. So there's two schedule milestones in terms of that. In March, we'll find out from one program, and then in May, we'll find out from a separate program.
The uncertainty is associated with SB1. If the repeal effort is successful in November, then all of those dollars that the CTC is essentially committing to as part of SB1 would go away, and then we would have to revert back to the current plan, which is to try to fund the I-5 with the remaining funds that the region gets. So the ability of the region is, to bring forward more projects is really largely dependent on having new funds, whether it's SB1, whether it's coming from the federal government or some other source. It's the ability of having those additional funds come to the region so that it's not just the environmental document that's funded, but then it's, okay, the ability to pay for the subsequent phases of work, design, right-of-way, and ultimately construction. If those anticipated dollars, may not arrive to the region, say, for another 10 years, it may not make sense to begin the environmental document.
How long is, and I'm sorry to get sideways on this, but how long is an environmental document good for?
Well, the longer, obviously it's good when you approve it, and then the longer you wait, there may be new laws, new requirements, new.
So it can be amended. I
would
guess
need to
I
be-
just would like to see this body do a little more forward planning. I realize that dollars and there's a lot of hinging in the air,
Right.
but there's a construction and there's the environmental portion as well.
Yes.
If you get your environmental done and money shows up, you're ready to go.
Right. And
so
so-
I'd like to. I guess I'm asking the body, maybe the executive committee here, to favor moving forward on some of these EIRs for some of these projects and looking at them. And I realize it comes down to dollars, but I don't know if we wait until it's construction dollars are available or not. It just seems to me in this time or this next decade with a lull of monies coming in, it might be a good time to do the EIRs and get some of those out of the way. Yes, they'll have to be amended later, but the longer you wait, the more obstacles get in the way of getting those done. So.
Right, and also
Yeah.
to answer, you ask about whether it makes sense to do it whole or piecemeal.
Yeah.
So the more dollars you have, it makes more sense to do the whole thing, so you can go ahead and do the corridor. But if you have fewer dollars, essentially it's like the accordion approach, fewer dollars means smaller projects, you may have to do it on a piecemeal basis.
Okay. I know this is a draft and it's going to come back as a final. Could you do any more in mining to see if there's any dollars that?
Yeah, in terms of, as Jose mentioned, SB1's a big thing, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, to the extent we get North Coast Corridor funding, we're asking for $195 million of funding from one of the competitive pots. We also put in as part of the formula dollars, the state dollars, the STIP dollars that the SB1 funded, there's another $162 million that the CPC. So to the extent that we're able to attract those monies and keep them in the region, it's going to give us a lot more flexibility in terms of sprouting new projects. But we can commit to between this March draft that you'll see this month and then at your board meeting on the 23rd and us coming back in May to see where we are on that, to see if we can carve off some funding that we could actually start work on some other regional projects. So those then in turn, so we can build a shelf basically of projects. So yeah, we can.
Well, it would be nice, I guess, for so we're ready with future
Yeah,
projects.
I mean, I think in areas we're also able to match funding and leverage funding. I know in the 78 quarter early on, Escondido and San Marcos, for example, provided funding for the Nordal Bridge, which we're to the extent that local dollars are put in as well. In Chula Vista, we're working with the city on some grade separation work that they funded the preliminary engineering of. I know Santee has put in some work on using their own money to work with Caltrans on that. So we could take a look at.
Well, and we've got local dollars to put in as well on this. And I don't know, I just kind of scratched my head when we just had transportation not too long ago, and we had to come up with another $385 million, and for the vote, it was there. So it just kind of amazes me that that kind of thing happens. And I know it was Transnet dollars, but it was for the extension of the San Elijo Bridge, which I understood needed to be done. And even, Chula Vista, we provided $20 million for sound walls and things like that. So I know money, I don't know, to me it seems it would be wise and prudent to be looking forward, and not just on the 78, but definitely on the 78. But regionally, I think we got to get ready for dollars, and I don't see that in this plan. We're ready for, the EI is ready so we can be more competitive.
Thanks, Jim.
All right, thanks.
Any other comments or questions?
Well, it'd be nice if Jim would poll Vista, Oceanside, Carlsbad, and Escondido, how much.
We came up with $1.5 million right now.
Just from the.
Just for the, well, $1 million from San Marcos.
Well, the other cities throw money in there too.
There's Sam.
Sam,
We did discuss
Fair
this.
share.
I mean, 78, there was an article in the UT, and there was an error in the, just dividing the area where the traffic was studied. But 78 remains the top congested road in San Diego County. There is no question about it. And now, it's not funded. It's not until 2025 or 2030. This is a crisis right now. In addition, we have doubled our economic activities in North County. We have nearly $6 billion in economic activities because of the situation in San Diego and the cost of living and you name it. So I think we really need, I agree with Mayor Desmond that it is an emergency right now and we need to start funding it. Now the $1 billion request, I believe it's from the gas tax, SB1, right? And there is a big chance that this will be repeated. It's polling at the 70% and 60%. And we have to think really right now on a plan B. If we don't get this money, where are we gonna get it? The $7 million, I think we requested it from the Transportation Commission, right? And then I don't know if we don't get it, what's the plan B? But I do agree, it is becoming a crisis. It is a crisis right now. I don't know what would happen 2, 3, 4 years from now if we don't get at least the connectors. And we did put $2.5 million, San Marcos put $2.5 million in the Nordal Bridge. We can come up with some money, sorry? We put 5. You put 5, okay. Yes. But we are willing to put some money into that to move, to at least do the connectors, and we can wait for maybe another 5, 6 years for the others. The staff, additional staffing, I understand that the staffing recommendation does not include converting a couple of current clinical term position to regular position, right? Correct. It doesn't, okay. So what happened, if we hire these additional staffing, I know some of them are for data research, which we need, I agree with that, but this is to reflect the workload. What about if the following year we don't have the same workload, what happens?
So we have, the way we staff our program is, we have some just layered structure. There's a core set of what we call regular staff. And then we supplement those staff with limited term or what we call temporary staff. So the limited term staff that are in the budget, we bring on when in periods of high workload. So for example, we know we're doing some major work with the Mid-Coast project.
Right.
So there's a lot of contracts, there's a lot of engineering work, and there's a lot of outreach and communication. So a substantial portion of our administrative staff and we work on contracts, for example, our engineering staff, even our legal staff have been brought on as limited terms. So unless there's continuing work that comes as the workload goes down, there's the opportunity to reduce the size of the staff. Obviously, over the time, we're going to see retirements as the baby boom generation retires. So I think we do have a very balanced way of
That answers my question. One last question, pension. I'm glad to see the Section 115 is going to adopt it to Section 115 based on Sandag's success. So, Andre, we are putting an additional $1 million. What about the liability? Did the liability increase more than the $1 million we put in, and what are we doing with the liability right now?
Yeah, so first of all, the pension numbers that we get are 1 year old, right? So the numbers that we have are through 2016. Unfortunately, PERS didn't have a very good return that year. It was less than 1%. So our numbers from 2015 that were 69% funded dropped down to 65% funded. However, the one positive is if you add the numbers that we've saved in Section 115 trust, which currently is $4.7 million, if you added that in, you actually get back to the same funding level that we were in 2015, back to the 69%. So I think you can see that what we've set up is actually working. And then on another positive, in 2017, the rates of return by PERS were over 11%. So they had a bad year in 2016, 2017 was great. So although I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, we can safely say that our funding portion is going to go up pretty significantly in 2017 numbers.
And I think it's gonna continue to go up because the return on investment is now based on 7%, and it's gonna go up and up because they're not making that kind of return. I would strongly recommend to put more money than the $1 million, because now we're maintaining the 69% funding. We should be at 100%. That's what the actuary told us clearly. You have to be at 100% funding. So $1 million is good, but we're maintaining our 69% funding. But I don't think it's adequate.
Thanks, Sam. Any further comments or questions? We need to move along. Excellent. I need a motion and a second. So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Moving on to 2018 Sandbag Legislative Program. Victoria returns.
Back. Okay. As you recall, the 2018 program, Attachment 1, serves as a roadmap for legislative action. The Board of Directors approved the program at its February 23rd meeting and directed staff to return with additional language related to monitoring offshore oil drilling legislation. Based on this direction, a new legislative goal, number 5C, was added to the monitor section of the legislative program, which is shown on 528 of your iPad. Inclusion of the new goal would be consistent with the regional plan, which includes policy objectives related to environmental stewardship, sustainability, and improving quality of life for the region. Pending executive committee action, the proposed modification is scheduled for approval by the board at its March 23rd meeting. The executive committee is asked to recommend that the board of directors approve the proposed amendment to the 2018 SANDAG legislative program, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
We have no speakers on this item. Comments, questions? We are seeking approval for this item.
So moved. Second.
Motion from Mayor Wells, second from Council President Cole. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Reflect motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item 5. Victoria's back again. Kirk, welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So I will be providing the legislative update on the federal portion, and then I'll turn it over and we can hear an update from the state. So the current budget funds the federal government through March 23rd. House and Senate leaders announced last month that a budget agreement had been reached for the FY17 and FY19 spending years, which would provide an additional $10 billion in defense and non-discretionary spending for FY18 and 19. The FY18 budget is expected to be resolved within the next couple weeks. The FY19 budget process is just getting started and is moving through the Congressional Appropriations Committee meetings, with passage expected later in the fall or winter. Both the FY18 and 19 budgets include $100 million for the Mid-Coast Corridor Transit Project. Staff is currently working with the committee in the House and Senate to try to secure an additional $25 million for each fiscal year for the Mid-Coast project, should Congress decide to allocate more funding to the New Starts program. Likewise, this week, the Trump administration has released, actually last week, the Trump administration released its infrastructure proposal with a little bit more details. The plan would spend approximately $200 million over 10 years and create 4 new programs and adds tax credits and incentives. The details of the proposal can be found in the report. There's not really been strong support for the proposal from either side. Both the House and Senate remain concerned about the costs and the lack of offsets to pay for the bill. House and Senate Republican leaders have also noted that there's not much support for a 25-cent gas tax increase. Yesterday, the Senate Democrats released an infrastructure proposal titled Senate Democrats' Jobs and Infrastructure Plan for America's Workers. Next month, staff will provide an overview of this proposal and try to provide some comparisons so that we can monitor the infrastructure plan developments. This concludes my federal legislative update, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have now.
Comments, questions?
Okay, and with that, today we have Kirk Blackburn joining us from Ellison Wilson Advocacy. Kirk represents Sandag in Sacramento and will provide us an update on state legislative activities.
Thank you. Good morning, Vice Chair and members. Kirk Blackburn with Ellison Wilson. Many of you also know Brooks Ellison, who can't be here today. He's dealing with some health issues with his daughter. But happy to be here and happy to give you a brief overview on the 2018 legislative session as far as state matters go. I'll start with just a basic overview on the environment, what we're dealing with. Obviously, it's we're just getting started on the year, and it's been an interesting year so far, and for many reasons, one of which is that it's election year. So we're dealing with election stuff and political maneuvering that's happening with that. One of those races is the governor's race. So with that comes Jerry Brown's last year as governor. And so we're seeing him, we're interested in seeing how he's going to handle his last year. We expect him to cement some of his legacy projects, high-speed rail, Delta tunnels. But we're also excited to see him take an initiative on SB1 repeal efforts and fighting against that along with many other groups. As far as leadership goes, San Diego's own Toni Atkins will be taking over as Senate Pro Tem on March 21st. Very exciting for a number of reasons. One, she's the first female Pro Tem. She's also the first openly gay Pro Tem. And from our experience, she's also one of the most experienced Pro Tems to take over, having served as Speaker previously. That leaves Anthony Rendon will still be Speaker. On the Republican side, we have Senator Pat Bates will continue on as Senate Republican leader, and Brian Dahle is an Assembly Republican leader. Todd Gloria taking more of a leadership role now. He's on the Speaker's leadership team, serving as Majority Whip. And as far as Transportation Committee chairs, we have Jim Bell in the Senate, Jim Frazier still in the Assembly. Who knows once Tony takes over what changes, oftentimes with a regime change, there's changes to committee chairs, so we'll see what Senator Atkins has in store. As far as the San Diego delegation, had an opportunity to sit down with all members of the San Diego delegation. Sandag staff, Robin, Kim, and Mayor Voss came up a couple weeks back. We had a chance to sit down with each member of the San Diego delegation, get a sense for, in a post-AB 805 world, sort of how everything's going. And happy to report that Sandag does have a great reputation still at the Capitol and is well respected. They were interested in a number of topics, and we updated them on SB1 projects, particularly in each one's their district as they're facing questions as the repeal efforts go forward. Also, they were very interested in the executive director recruitment process and how it's all going. Happy, want to see if Mayor Voss or Kim had any additional feedback as to how those meetings went and your perspective. But from our perspective, they went great, and overall very, very well.
Sacramento is functional, Steve?
I'm sorry?
Sacramento is functional?
As functional as it ever is. I'll leave it at that. Anything you want to add, Kim?
No, we had great meetings. I mean, really, we met with all the members on the Senate and the Assembly side, I'd say with the exception of Assembly Member Gopal, who wasn't available to meet with us. We met with his staff, but we did meet with Assembly Member Weber and stuff, which was in a hearing at the time. So we met with both sides, Senate, House, both parties. Gave an update on what's going on with Sandag, with the executive director recruitment, with the SB1 projects, both the regional projects funded in their areas, as well as your own projects, your own cities projects and county projects that are funded in their districts, and the Caltrain shop projects. I also want to know what's going on with the Mid-Coast project and the North Coast Corridor project, our big projects under construction in South Bay, BRT, which we're really excited to launch the next year. So I would concur, very well received. They're interested to know what we're doing, interested to see how we're moving forward on our major work efforts. So it's something I think we should be doing on a regular basis, going up there and just meeting with the folks, whether we go up there or we meet with them in the district.
Any further comments or questions? This is an informational item only.
I know it's just coming out, but any additional item from a transportation standpoint of the merging back of the airport with the Port Authority?
Nothing's in print yet, so still that's an evolving issue, but yeah, we expect to see something, I understand, as possibly as early as next week. Real quickly, just to finish up, just want to talk about legislation, specific legislation real fast. Obviously, over 2,300 bills introduced, and we're still digging through all those. They were introduced before the February 16th deadline. But excited to say that Senator Pat Bates has agreed to introduce a bill on behalf of Sandag. SB 1151 is a bill that essentially will allow any city in the county of San Diego, as well as the county, to adopt a neighborhood electric vehicle transportation plan, NEV transportation plan. Under current law, they're limited application or limited use for those on public streets, and so once you have a transportation plan, it opens up a bit of what you can use for those. Senator Bates is a great champion. She's ran a similar bill a couple years ago for a project in Orange County on NEV transportation plan, so very familiar with it. And as we understand it, Carlsbad, Chula Vista are interested in taking advantage of that once passed. So we'll be keeping everyone advised, and that's a smooth process. With that, thank you very much. It's an honor to represent Sandag up at the Capitol, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Kirk. I don't think we have any further questions or comments. Please let Brooks know that we'll be thinking of he and his family. Thank you. Appreciate you coming down. Thank you. Moving on to item 7, San Diego Regional Airport Authority, an update on airport federal funds and responsibilities from John Kirk and Mark Stroll. John, take it away.
Good morning. Several times over the past few years, issues have been raised both by this committee and by the public regarding the Airport Authority's use of its funding, specifically to address traffic issues in the area of the airport. The Executive Committee directed staff to work with the airport on 3 particular issues. And this morning, I'm going to give a brief overview of these 3 issues, and more detailed analysis is in the staff report today. And then Mug Stoll, Sandag's planning director, is going to describe how Sandag, the Airport Authority, and other regional transportation stakeholders are collaborating to pursue solutions to the airport's traffic issues. The first issue that was raised is whether the Airport Authority is required to mitigate for off-site impacts from its projects. And the answer to that, the short answer is yes. The Airport Authority has the same responsibilities to mitigate for project impacts as any other public agency. And that includes both on-site and off-site impacts, but it's also conditioned, as with other public agencies, to the extent feasible. If an agency finds that it cannot implement feasible mitigation measures for a project, then it can adopt what's called a statement of overriding consideration. That statement of overriding consideration does have to be supported by substantial evidence, and ultimately it balances a project benefits against what the unmitigated impacts would be from the project. It considers a number of different factors, including the jurisdictional ability to implement mitigation and funding that's available. And it must show why mitigation is unfeasible. The Airport Authority Master Plan EIR, in it, the Airport Authority recognizes that there would be a number of unmitigated impacts from the implementation of the Airport Authority's master plan. And it stated that mitigation for those was infeasible primarily for 2 reasons. First of all, it talked about how, with regard to local streets and roads and with freeway connectors, that those were the responsibility of other jurisdictions, including the City of San Diego and Caltrans. Additionally, it spoke of the limitation on its funding, and that there was no available funding that could be committed to those off-site projects. However, the Airport Authority and its EIR did say that it would seek FAA approval for the use of airport funds if and when the City or Caltrans implemented the roadway improvements that were identified in the EIR. Sandag disagreed with that at the time. We felt the Airport Authority could do more to mitigate the project impacts by either committing to funding or adopting project alternatives that would generate less impacts that were also identified in the EIR. Ultimately, we discussed those concerns at length with the Airport Authority. The board was briefed at that point. We considered litigation against them, but ultimately, instead of litigating the issue, Sandag and the Airport Authority entered into a Memorandum of Agreement. And that's Exhibit 1 to the report, beginning at page 10 or 552 on your tablets. And per that, the Airport Authority agreed that they would plan and develop future planning for the airport in partnership with all regional transportation stakeholders. Additionally, the Airport Authority, Sandag, and the City of San Diego would agree to pursue funding for off-airport surface transportation improvements that would address those traffic issues. The second issue that we were asked to look at is whether the airport authority could spend its revenues for off-site mitigation. And the answer to that is potentially yes, but it is very limited. I would say that it's definitely more limited than most other public agencies that we see. Airport revenue is very broadly defined, and generally revenue that is earned on the airport, however it's earned, is considered to be airport revenue, subject to the restrictions imposed under federal law. That includes parking revenue, it includes revenue from commercial tenants. It can be used for facilities directly and substantially related to air transportation, and that could be a link from the airport to the nearest mass transportation facility, such as rail or highway, and that is designed primarily for airport use. And there's even under federal law the allowance that if something is used also by people not going to the airport, that it can be a proportional share. So ultimately, it could be used, but it is very limited. There was also the issue raised about whether the airport's revenue is grandfathered to some extent and more available because of that. The history there, the San Diego Airport Authority previously was with the port, and at that point, its funding was commingled with the port. Prior to 1982, there was an allowance to use that revenue outside the airport, but since the airport authority is now a single entity, that grandfather issue no longer exists, and they are no longer grandfathered. So those regular federal statutory restrictions do apply, and that, I believe the FAA has also agreed with that. Finally, are there non-FAA controlled funds that can be used by the airport authority to pay for off-site mitigation? Yes, but very limited. Potentially traffic and parking fine penalties could be used. And in fact, the FAA has found that permissible with other airports, but that's a reasonably limited funding stream. So moving forward, what we're really focusing on is collaboration efforts between the airport authority and other regional transportation stakeholders. And Muggs is going to talk a little bit about what those look like.
Yeah, very quickly, talk a little bit about the committee that's working on the North Harbor Drive corridor study. Through our Service Bureau, we're supporting that effort with traffic modeling work that's been done to support that effort. Also through our Service Bureau, we are currently looking into the concept for a convention center to airport skyway feasibility study in the area. We also have a relatively small capital project that's underway that'll provide pedestrian improvements between the Middletown Light Rail Station and the rental car facility shuttle to make it easier for trolley passengers to access that shuttle and get over to the terminals. We're looking for the completion of that construction in the fall of this year. And then in a larger sense, in our regional plan, we have carried an intermodal transportation center project in our plan for a number of years. We've done some feasibility work on that, on the development of that facility over the years. It's in the outer years of the plans. There's no current funding identified for it, but that would be a facility that would provide a more direct connection to the ground transportation, in particular the trolley and the train services. And even some of the early studies would show that we could use that if and when high-speed rail comes to San Diego, that there could be a connection there. And there's been discussion about, currently there is basically a bus shuttle that goes back and forth between the rental car facility and the terminals. There has been some discussions about maybe upgrading that into some sort of a people mover type facility. So there's been a lot of work on that, but that's a much longer term issue that doesn't have current funding. And so those are some of the things that we're working on with the airport authority, along with the other various agencies that are involved in the area, the port, the city, the county, and the transit operators. So that's just a brief overview of the work that we're doing there. And with that, I think we'll turn it back to the chair for any.
Thank you, John and Muggs. As a reminder, this is information only. I do have two speakers. Catherine Rhodes.
Catherine Rhodes, and of course I don't agree with that at all. And the reason for that is because the reason why we have grandfather status is because we're on state highlands. It has nothing to do with the name of the airport sponsor. For example, let's just say the Port of New York and New Jersey split, which is New York and New Jersey. With that change, they would get rid of their airport grandfather status. The status belongs to you and me as citizens of the state of California. Because our grandfather status was given to us through the Federal Register, through the FAA, got the FAA LDO in Los Angeles, you know, it's basically not true. And the way you can see this is that, let's just say, you know, they move the authority back to the port from the airport for land use. I personally think that Sandag, as our elected officials, that you guys should have all land use and planning, regional planning for you, for transportation. And one of the big main things is the airport stated back when they did all their EIRs and stuff like that, that we would have 14% transit to the airport by probably about 8 years ago. We still have 1%. We started at 1%, we're still at 1%. You guys haven't met the target. And another easy way to show that you can use airport revenues outside of the airport is the Quiet Home program that they have for windows. The airport, San Diego International Airport, gives private citizens money to have windows in their house. That is all airport use, so it can be done. And so what my recommendation to you is, instead of course, listening to what the airport says, is actually go to the people who are responsible for it, and that's the State Lands Commission. And so what you would do is you would go to the State Lands Commission and ask them for a legal opinion if the city of San Diego International Airport and myself somehow lost our grandfather status when the airport sponsor changed from the port to the airport authority. And they will not tell you that. I do know that the LAFD, ADO, he's very adamant about that. And the reason for that is that he gets a lot of praise for not allowing any of this money to be used off-site. Like it's used off-site for, let's say, port in San Francisco. There's a big giant exemption to transportation to the airport or a project. Boston does it, Washington DC, excuse me, everybody does it but San Diego. It's our money, and we could have a world-class San Diego instead of just a world-class airport. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. And April Bowling from the San Diego Airport. Welcome, April. Good to see you.
Here.
That's fine.
First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the Harbor Drive Mobility Committee that Muggs referred to, and just kind of give a little bit of an overview on that. One of the things that we have realized as we were moving forward with the airport development plan, which is going to include the replacement of Terminal 1, was that there really has not been a holistic look at what was going to be happening along Harbor Drive. We were planning things, the port was planning things, the county has plans, the city has plans, everybody has plans, but none of the policymakers were getting together in a room to really talk about what all of those were. And it's important to know what those are. First of all, we need to come up with solutions. And second of all of those projects are going to require environmental impact reports that need to talk about cumulative effects. And if you're going to talk about cumulative effects, it would be good to know what the real cumulative effects were before you go forward with a process like that. So we got all of the policymakers together in the room, and out of that came several things, but one was a traffic study along Harbor Drive, and the main thing that I would like to say today is that I really appreciate the fact that the Sandag participants in this and the staff moving forward really took on a lot and tried to get this moving as quickly as it could. It was a very heavy lift for everyone, and we all recognize that. And at the last Mobility Committee meeting, I think everyone communicated their appreciation for the work that Sandag did, because until we know exactly what the problem, the magnitude of the problem in that area, it is impossible to start coming up with solutions. Now that we have the magnitude known, the next phase is to look at possible solutions, and we're moving forward with that. So It certainly has been a collaborative effort with all of the jurisdictions that actually have a finger in the pie along Harbor Drive, and it is many, to be able to have that conversation without saying, well, we can only talk about the road to the median because the minute we get to the median on the other side it belongs to someone else. It's kind of a meaningless conversation. And once we come up with the solutions, then the next step is going to be to talk about how they're going to be paid for. And you know, to the extent that the airport can, we are certainly willing to do that. And you know, we do have more restrictions on the funds that we have, but if there are ways that that can be used, then we are certainly going to do that because we're interested in getting as many people to and from the airport, whether they be our local citizens or you know, tourists coming in, as many people as possible to and from the airport, and to the extent that we can use transit, so much the better, to make San Diego you know, the place that it can be. So, are there any questions?
Thank you.
Okay.
Comments, questions, and Mayor Salas.
Yes, I had a question for John, and you talked about the past where when the port was together with the airport authority, and there was a commingling of funds, and it was allowable just because that had been the past practice. But now they're separated. If there was legislation that was successful that brought them back together, would that past agreement that would allow them to commingle the funds, would then we be able to easily?
Great question. Ultimately, it really has to do with prior to the enactment of legislation in, I think it was 1982, that it existed that way prior to 1982. So to the extent that it was split apart or commingled again, I do not believe that that grandfather would be reinstated at that point, because it's just because of the dates.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out a couple other things that, you know, I don't know if Uber and Lyft are now considered transit or not, but that is a huge, you know, carpool, or you have at least 2 or 3 people in a car, and that has really taken over a majority. It's 2/3 of the traffic now from what used to be all taxi cabs. Now 2/3 of that is Uber and Lyft, and so that's been quite a change. And then the airport staff and I'm not sure, I guess it's the city are working together on possibly a stop, you know, or maybe getting some sort of transportation from the, I guess it's called the Middletown stop, or the Midtown stop, to possibly have transportation or pick up people at that stop, then bring them to the rent-a-car facility and then back onto the, over to the airport terminal. And the federal grants that Mrs. Rhodes had stated there, that this was free money that or money that we're giving out for the Quiet or Hope program, that's a federal grant that we're administrating. So we get the fingers pointed at us, but that's a federal grant. All that money comes from Washington somehow magically, but it's not airport money directly that's being spent on the Quiet or Hope program outside of the airport.
Thanks, Jim. Mayor Morrison.
Yeah, just, you know, I'm looking on the Harbor Drive study. How much is being looked at with the development of Harbor Island itself?
That's definitely part of the consider. As a matter of fact, the traffic analysis and the model runs that we did specifically put in proposed land use changes there that were given to our modeling team by the consultants working on behalf of the Port of San Diego.
Because I know when I was at the port and they had a 4-hour presentation on that and decision making, they only were talking about how many more thousands of hotel spots they could put there. Now they moved the car rental over to the other side because of the capacity problems on Harbor Drive. So they moved it over to the Pacific Freeway side, and now they're looking at putting in thousands and thousands of more hotels there. And at the end of their 4 hours, when I asked them about, well, what about the traffic problems on Harbor Drive because you have a capacity problem there, all I got was blank stares. That was never a part of their report, and that was never part of the consideration. The idea of transportation or mitigation never got brought up in a 4-hour discussion. So just want to bring it up.
Thanks, Ron. Supervisor Horn.
Yeah, I'm not involved with the airport authority, but you know there's the rail spur that comes down. It used to go in the MCRD. The tracks are still there. And at the end of the runway on the west side, NTC has not been developed. All those barracks are still there. Why don't they run what would it take to run a rail line down a right-of-way you already own and cross that runway on the west side and bring a train into the terminal.
Can't do that on a runway.
Thanks, Bill.
So.
Supervisor Roberts.
I have to admit, I had never thought of that. Jim and I have been working on trying to make some improvements. The problem is there's a major problem if it's been swimming under the rug for too long. The position of the airport, well, we need the connections to the freeway, and so Caltrans, you gotta build these flyovers to get to the freeway. Grape Street, Ogden Street, and Laurel Street are absolutely a disaster. They're adding more stuff, both the airport and the port, and nobody wants to pay for anything. I sit on that, and was just briefed on that report the other day, and they have a transportation, quote-unquote, expert. What he's coming up with is pathetic. Let's just say that in terms of the mitigation that it's going to do. It's going to avoid making left-hand turns heading west on Laurel Street to get to Harbor Drive. You won't be able to turn left anymore there. You got a right turn and a left turn. They're going to eliminate the left turn, and that's going to make, in the words of this consultant, it's going to make a major difference, and it's not. It's hard to get anybody to look at this stuff, even small improvements. That, you know, I can't believe that there isn't access to dollars. When the rental car business opened, virtually nothing was done on the surrounding streets. And it'll happen in time because you'll see the backups going across the railroad tracks and everything else that are occurring there. They could have added an extra turn lane. It's just nobody has focused on how do we do a better job on this. How can we get people in there? And there's more than it. We got to just, we got to keep building. Both the port and the airport are involved with this study, and you're right. The port is going to increase the density, not reduce the density where the rental car used to be. And the rest of that property, they've got a whole lot of projects that are planned. I think it's Ron that pointed that out. I'm really concerned. And maybe that's not anything to worry about. The county has no projects planned. And there was a reference made, the county has projects, but we don't have any projects planned. We've already done it. We moved our parking off of the harbor for the most part. Somebody might notice we built something called a parking structure over in Little Italy. Not on the waterfront, but the increases have me very concerned in terms of what's happening. And we went through a planning process for the rental cars. Went to an ungodly number of meetings, thinking that we were going to then talk about solutions. We got to the end, and we go, that's it. We're not. That's the end of the environmental process. I mean, it was such a charade that it's definitely speechless. You might remember, some of you remember, we sued San Diego State because they weren't mitigating off their property. The changes that are coming, and maybe it'll be a good thing for the port to take over the airport authority, because we're not getting solutions, not even small solutions to the problem that's there. And it's going to get increasingly worse until, I guess, we get the freeway traffic, because there's no interim things that looked at in terms of trying to work with the city and getting more lanes on streets that would move traffic through there. Probably the worst thing that's ever happened, the intersection at Harbor and Grape Street, when because of Roger Hitchcock's saying it was a bad thing, the cameras were taken down for the people going through the red lights. That intersection is definitely out of level service F. There's no question about it. And it's because the whole series of them, the capacity on the existing road system to get into the airport, Uber or not, is overloaded. They're way over capacity, and it's not going to get better. You're going to be adding more cars to it, and I find, you can't hide behind, we don't have the money. Somebody needs to say, what are the solutions, and then let's go find the money, rather than saying, since we haven't identified the money, then we're not gonna do anything. That kind of
Sounds like the 78.
would not have gotten the, I can tell you that any of the projects that we have accomplished here for the Mid-Coast. And there were people that told us, well, gee, you don't have the money. In fact, I think a long congressperson was adamantly opposed to that project. Because, oh, no, it's going to be too expensive, you never be able to get the money. If you have a vision of what's needed, then you start working on it, and there's an absence of that effort. And that's what upsets me. I don't understand fully Catherine's rationale, but something needs to be done. And these problems cannot be continued, just can't keep kicking them down the road. And that's what's happening. And all due respect to the airport authority, and maybe it will be better returning to a port-controlled airport, which, not that the port does a whole lot of that much better. They'll say they don't have to run it either. It's the only organization around that spends $80 million a year to collect $75 million in rent each year. So they've done that's good. Yeah. But I think as a transportation agency, we should be more aware. Maybe we should have a presentation of the things I saw, and you can judge for yourself how we can a series of solutions we're coming up with, getting the impacts that are continuing around the streets.
Just real quick on this. I just want to say that the airport has always been willing to pay everything it legally has to do. We always have been. The firewall that's in place primarily happened because of LA. In LAX, the city was stealing money from the airport and using it off-site. And the FAA put in a firewall years ago and said, you will not be using money off-site at the airport. So I know that wherever the airport authority ends up, we've always been willing to pay whatever fair share. We've always been able to play nice together. It's just we got firewalls that like every other organization. We haven't been able to punch through yet.
Okay. We do have an April 6th Transportation Committee item on this topic, so the discussion will continue. Reminder, next Executive Committee meeting is Friday, April 13th. Friday the 13th? Whoa. At Palace Spa Resort Casino. Sorry.
Happy gambling.
Happy gambling.